Robertson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Does he stand by his reported statement of 1 May 2012 that if the Honourable John Banks had lied over a donation from Kim.com, then he would be sacked from Cabinet?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce, on behalf of the Prime Minister.
On behalf of the Prime Minister, I note that that was a reported statement and not a quote. I stand by my repeated statements to this House that my Chief of Staff...
I apologise, the Minister. It's just that the Minister may continue. Absolutely.
I stand by my repeated statements to this House that my Chief of Staff sought and received an assurance from Mr Banks that he had fully complied with the requirements of the Local Electoral Act in respect of donations.
Supplementary.
Grant Robertson.
Does he recall telling this House during question 2 on the 1st of May that Mr Banks gave his assurance during a phone call to his Chief of Staff that he was not aware that Mr.com had made the donation to his mayoral campaign?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Prime Minister, I think the answer is the same as to the primary question, which is my Chief of Staff sought and received an assurance from Mr Banks that he fully complied with the requirements of the Local Electoral Act in respect of donations.
Point of order, the Honourable Trevor Mallard.
Mr Speaker, that was a very tight, a very specific question about a matter which is related but different to the answer given. You might, I know you've got very good recall, but you might want to replay in order to test whether or not that question was even addressed.
The member does raise a valid point of order in my view, because I think the Minister implied in his answer the answer, but I'll let the member repeat his question to
Thank you, Mr.
so
Speaker.
the House has certainty.
Does he recall telling this House during question 2 on the 1st of May that Mr Banks gave his assurance during a phone call to his Chief of Staff that he was not aware that Mr.com had made the donation to his mayoral campaign?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
On behalf of the Prime Minister, obviously it's difficult for me to recall that specifically, but I can confirm again to the House that my Chief of Staff sought and received an assurance from Mr Banks that he had fully complied with the requirements of the Local Electoral Act in respect of donations.
Grant Robertson.
How can he still have confidence in the Honourable John Banks in light of documents that show that in February this year, when Mr Banks was a Cabinet Minister, he told Mr.com's lawyer that he could not assist Mr.com in getting medical attention in prison because, quote, that may backfire on Kim if it became known about the election support. A clear admission that he did know about the donation from Kim.com and could remember it as recently as this year.
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Well, Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Prime Minister, I don't believe that in regards to the, I presume he's referring to the papers that were released yesterday, and I'm pretty sure that the Prime Minister hasn't read those. He notes, though, that the police determined that there was insufficient evidence to consider a prosecution, and that's the Prime Minister's concern.
Point of order, Grant Robertson.
Mr Speaker, I seek leave of the House to table the witness statement of Gregory Brett Towers, lawyer for Mr Kim.com, who reported a phone conversation with John Banks where he said that he wished to publicly support Kim, but that may backfire on Kim if it became known about his election support.
Leave us sought to table that document. Is there any objection? Oh, there is objection. Grant Robertson, supplementary question.
How can he continue to have confidence in John Banks as a minister in light of the sworn statement from Kim.com that Mr Banks explicitly solicited a donation from him and told Mr.com, quote, I want to help you, Kim, and I can help you more effectively if no one knows about this donation, indicating both that he knew about the donation and had an intent to hide it?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Prime Minister, I note that the member is just reading a series of allegations made in some documents released yesterday. I also note that the police obviously assessed the information and determined not to do a prosecution.
Point of order, Mr Speaker.
Point of order, Grant Robertson.
Mr Speaker, I seek the leave of the House to table a sworn witness statement from Kim.com that states in it that Mr Banks said to him, I want to help you, Kim, and I can help you more effectively if no one knows about this donation.
Leave us sought to table that document. Is there any objection? No. There is objection. Grant Robertson, supplementary question. Order. I want to hear this supplementary question.
Supplementary question. How can he continue to have confidence in John Banks as a Cabinet Minister in light of the sworn statement from Wayne Tempero, Kim.com's bodyguard, who said that he spoke with Mr Banks to confirm if the cheques had been deposited, and Mr Banks and Mr Tempero's quote is, "Have the cheques been cleared or not?" And he said, yes, they had been cleared, indicating that he was aware of the donation and had misled Mr Key's Chief of Staff.
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Well, on behalf of the Prime Minister, the member can read as many of these things as he wants, but I would note they are allegations that the police did not proceed with the prosecution, and also the Labor Party themselves described to Mr.com, and I don't know whether this is true or not, they said that he was of a dubious character. That's as late as 23rd
Point of
January
order.
this year.
Point of order, Grant Robertson.
It's an irrelevant part of the answer.
Order. Well, it is that it is. Well, in fairness, it's not totally irrelevant because the member was asking about an affidavit from a certain character, and in his answer, the minister is at liberty to challenge the character of the person, and so. I think that it was not out of order what the minister did. Supplementary question. Point of order, Grant.
I don't want to belabor the point, but the witness statement I was referring to there was not from Kim.com. It was from his bodyguard, not from Kim.com.
I think it was still not totally irrelevant that the minister is raising issues of character.
Supplementary question.
Grant Robertson, supplementary question.
If the Prime Minister's test for John Banks staying as a minister is only a legal one, why will he not sack him, given that the police file released yesterday says in paragraph 40 of the Criminal Assessment Report that police conclude that the law was breached and the elements for a prosecution were met under section 1342, but it did not proceed only because it fell outside the time for a prosecution?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Prime Minister, again, haven't read those details, but I did note that the police determined that there was insufficient evidence to consider a prosecution, and also the Prime Minister, I think, would note that he holds his ministers to a higher standard than that of the previous government in regards to, say, for example, an example like Tandem.
Order. Supplementary question, the Honourable Trevor Mallard.
Is the Prime Minister aware that the executive summary of the case released in relation to the Banks interview records at paragraph 29 those present, but paragraphs 30, 31, 32, 33 and 34 have all been withheld at the request of Mr Banks, and is that an indication of the openness and transparency that he requires of his ministers?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Prime Minister, it's difficult to take lectures from that member and that party about standards of transparency.
Order. The Minister should answer the question, at least make some attempt to answer the question. The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
From who? From you?
Now, order.
Pots and kettles.
Now, a number of national members seem to have suddenly gone blind. The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
I'm sorry, Mr Speaker, I just wasn't sure that Mr Cunliffe was telling an intentional joke or just...
Order. The Minister will just answer the question. Minister, please to answer the question.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Prime Minister, no, I can't confirm that. I certainly haven't. I don't believe the Prime Minister's had the opportunity to read the file either.
Grant Robertson, supplementary question.
Why is the Prime Minister prepared to have a minister in his cabinet who has misled him, his Chief of Staff and the whole public of New Zealand, when we all know that he received the donations, he asked for the donations, and he even asked for them to be seen as anonymous, as in the papers released yesterday? Why should that minister be in his cabinet? Why won't he just get on and sack him?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Prime Minister, I think that's because the member, for a number of reasons actually, but firstly the Minister concerned was not in the House, in fact not even campaigning to be in the House at the time that the matters under discussion occurred. Secondly, the police found that they wouldn't proceed with prosecution. And thirdly, Mr Speaker, I think everybody has accepted that the electoral law that applies locally at the time and indeed now does need improving. That's why the government made the announcements it made yesterday, and if the Labor Party was concerned, they had plenty of time to make those changes themselves.
Supplementary question, the Honourable Trevor Mallard.
Does having someone who lied and was shown to lie...
Order. No, the member cannot use that
I haven't
kind
yet,
of...
Mr Speaker.
No, order. The member is referring specifically to another member and claiming they've been shown to have lied. The member cannot do that. The Honourable Trevor
Point of order,
Mallard.
Mr Speaker.
Point of order.
At which point did I refer to a member?
I accept the member's point, and if I was premature, I apologise, but the member knows he mustn't refer to an individual member. The Honourable Trevor Mallard.
Is it his policy to allow people who lie and have been shown to lie to be members of his ministry?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Prime Minister, I'm not asking a particular hypothetical situation. Of course, the member has told the Speaker that it is a hypothetical situation, and I'm acknowledging that. Once again, it is not the job of the Prime Minister to read police files or involve himself in police prosecutions, which seems to be the suggestion. The police determined there was not evidence to prosecute and didn't.
Supplementary question, the Honourable Trevor Mallard.
Is the Prime Minister therefore confirming that the prosecution test is the same test as the ethical standard for his ministry?
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Prime Minister, again, he has some difficulty, I'm sure, accepting lectures on ethical standards from the side of the House.
Order. The question was a fair question about the tests for acceptable behaviour by the Prime Minister, and it deserves to be treated seriously. The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Prime Minister, I'm sure he is confident of the ethical standards that he sets for his ministers.
Point of order, Grant Robertson.
Mr Speaker, I seek the leave of the House to table the executive summary of the Detective Inspector Mark Benefield's criminal assessment report, which indicates in it that the threshold had been reached for prosecution under section 1342 of the Local Electoral Act for John Banks's actions, but it did not occur because it was outside the 6-month time period.
Leave is sought to table that document. Is there any objection? There is objection. Question number 4, Kevin Haig.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the